In June of this year, I moved out of my parents' apartment as I finally got a steady job and longed for some freedom. I looked for affordable apartments in my city and found one that's a 2 or 3 minute walk from my parents' place. To me, it was perfect. I'd get to live alone, and my parents would still be nearby so I could visit them whenever I wanted or pop in to have breakfast with them. The apartment itself is great. It's not much to look at, but for a single male, it's more than enough. My apartment has a long corridor connecting each room, with my front door being at the start of the corridor. My bedroom is the second room on the left, but since the walls are pretty thin, you can literally hear people in the apartment complex walking and talking. Last week, I came home from the pub after meeting up with a few friends. It wasn't really late, and I had the day off, so I took a shower and hopped into bed to watch a movie. It was probably around midnight when I heard a faint knock coming from the front door. I sat up from bed, went to the door, and looked through the peephole. Sure enough, it was pitch black. I shrugged it off and went back to my room, but before I could even sit down properly, I heard a slightly louder knock-knock. At this point, I thought it was my friends playing a prank on me, so I called one of them and asked if he was knocking on my door, and, if so, that it wasn't amusing. He paused for a second and said, "Dude, I'm at home. I have to be up at like 7:30. I believed him and hung up the phone. I was talking pretty loudly, so whoever was knocking probably heard me, and as soon as I hung up, I heard another knock. By now, I was pretty pissed off, so I walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and saw nothing. I then unlocked the door, took a peek, and closed the door and locked it. Angry and annoyed, I decided to wait and catch whoever was knocking, so I spent a solid 10 minutes silently looking through the peephole. I was a bit startled when someone put their hand over the peephole and knocked again. I immediately started unlocking the door and ran out to the apartment hall. I heard someone booking it down the steps and then heard him, supposedly, lean against the wall as his jacket brushed the wall. I ran a few steps down before realizing that whoever it was waiting behind the corner to jump me. I hurried back inside and called the cops. They arrived within a few minutes, scanned the building and the street but couldn't find anyone. They told me it could just be some kids pulling a prank and to never run after someone. They kept a patrol car around the entire night and the knocking stopped. It could have been some kids being dumb, but the part that gave me the creeps was the fact that whoever it was ran down the stairs and stopped behind the corner. If it were pranksters, I find it more likely that they would have just booked it outside. My husband and I live in a very rural place. It's known as a holler where we're from. For those who don't know, a holler is a hollow or a road that runs along a creek in a valley between two mountains. Our nearest neighbor is about 100 yards away on one side and through a wooded area on the other. The way our house is laid out, if you drive up our hill and park, you come to the back door. The front door faces the road, and no one ever knocks on our front door. One night, a couple of years ago, I decided to go to bed a little earlier than my husband. I had been asleep for a couple of hours when my husband burst through the bedroom door. He's mumbling and rambling in a desperate whisper. He has his phone in his hand, and I can just make out the light shining on his face. I'm so out of it at first that I can't make sense of what he's saying. I lay there for a second, and then suddenly I hear him clearly whisper. He's trying to break down the door. I sit bolt upright in bed asking what on earth he is talking about. He shushes me, tells me to whisper, and says he has to call the police. I glance at the clock and it's 3 a.m. I reach to turn on the light and he loudly whispers, "No." He gets through to 911 and tells them that we need assistance at our address. I catch a few details, but my head is spinning. After he gets off the phone with them, he tells me what has happened. It was late and he was still up playing a game when suddenly he heard heavy footsteps on the porch. He paused his game to listen, and then there was a knock, another knock, and then repetitive beating on the door. He could hear a man's voice, but could not make out what he was saying. Instead of opening the door, he decided to walk out the back door and around to the front of the house to see who it was. He thought it could possibly be our older neighbor needing help with his wife. So he walks out the back door and around to the front, and sees a large man dressed all in black, carrying a duffel bag. At this point, the man is pounding on the door so hard that it looked like he was trying to break it in. My husband waits for a second and then asks the guy if he needs help or something. The man apparently didn't realize that my husband was behind him because he started yelling into the door, "Just let me in and I won't hurt you." At this point, my husband decides no more questions are necessary. He runs back in the house, locks the door, turns out the light in the kitchen, and bursts into the bedroom to call the police and wake me up. After he calls them, we wait huddled in darkness for 40 minutes for a policeman to show up at our house. 40 freaking minutes. His excuse was, small town, no one was on duty, and he had been asleep. The policeman doesn't even get out of his car either. He just sits there and spotlights the house from our driveway as my husband goes outside and tells him the story and describes what he could of the man. The cop leaves, my husband comes back in, and we sit in the darkness of our bedroom, terrified until daybreak, wondering who that guy was and what he was going to do to us if he actually did get in. Growing up, I always wanted to go on a bike ride at night. Something about it seemed really cool to me. It wasn't until I was 13 that my mom finally let me. She told me to wear my helmet, have my phone, take a flashlight, and she set the parameters for where I was allowed to go. She gave me about 4 miles, which was a lot to me, so right after the sunset, I was off. I loved it. There were no people out walking their dogs, no kids running around, and the temperature was perfect. It was really fun. So fun that I ignored the limits my mom set. Where I was biking was all walking paths. It was one of those grassy areas between 2 neighborhoods. There was this long path that went at least 600 feet at a 25-degree angle. I was flying down this hill, having an absolute blast, and darted right through the parameters. My mom set these limits for a reason. Everything on the inside was close to houses and people. The outside, more specifically, the place where the path I was on led to, was barren. I rode along this path for 10 minutes before I could only see some of the lights of the houses on the inside of the limits. After 15 minutes of riding along this dirt path, I heard singing. It sounded about 30 or 40 feet in front of me. I stopped riding to hear it better. It was a woman's voice. She was singing Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles, but she wasn't singing the words, just the melody of the vocals. Her voice was strange. You know how when you have phlegm in your throat, your voice gets scratchy? That's what her voice sounded like. I inched forward to try and see her. I got close enough to see the silhouette of hair bouncing up and down like she was headbanging. I decided to get my flashlight out. I was thinking that maybe this person was in need of help or something, or maybe this was an insane person, and the light would scare them away. So I took the flashlight out of my pocket, pointed it at her, and turned it on. The moment the light hit her, she stopped moving completely. She was facing away from me. She had disgusting hair that seemed to be sticking together in clumps. She was wearing a very oversized bright red hoodie. I was almost too scared to move. I think she was too. I conjured up as much bravery as I could and said, "Sorry," in a very "oops, this is the wrong room" kind of way. She didn't respond. I turned off the flashlight and put it back in my pocket. Just as I was turning my bike around, she screamed. She screamed in an awful, awful, high-pitched voice. I damn near shit myself as I threw myself back onto my bike. I heard her voice getting closer to me. I booked it as fast as I could. I didn't look behind me, and I didn't stop pedaling. Her screaming grew quieter and quieter until it dissolved into the howling of the wind.